All right, so welcome back to this episode of New Narratives. And today we have with us Elizabeth Carroll, who is a 24-year-old who took the leap from undergrad to move to New York City and pursue a career in management consulting. And on top of her strenuous work hours, she's spent the last 2 years navigating the New York City dating scene and has learned a lot about herself and what is most important along the way. And outside of work, Elizabeth enjoys cooking, yoga, Pilates, running, reading, and spending time with friends and family. So, welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank
Good
you
to
so
have you.
much. Yeah, no, it's great to be here and this is an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because I know that the New York City dating scene has quite a reputation of being particularly difficult. And I myself have had that experience, which actually like led to starting Hum Hum. So know that you are not alone in this experience of the New York City dating scene. And I guess maybe that's like a fun place to kind of
Yeah.
start is how would you describe just like how would you encapsulate what that even is, the New York City dating scene?
It's just like kind of chaotic a little bit and I feel like there's this pressure that I had never seen before in my entire life, and it was like you should be going on 3 dates a week with people that you don't know. Like the dating apps are really prevalent, and like there was this pressure to that you were supposed to be seeing like 5 different people at a time, and like you knew that they were seeing other people and you had to like be casual and cool, and everyone was always talking about their dating life. So it was like very, very interesting. Um, and like my first year in the city, I casually dated. In college, I had had a boyfriend for 3 years and kind of wanted to like take a year to just focus on me and just like also have fun. But um last summer I actually met someone at a bar, which is another thing too. It's like people approach you, it's like very interesting. But I met someone at a bar and we actually dated for 8 months, which was like very interesting too. And it's like the New York City dating scene, like we both work so much and like our whole time is like basically working. And then like when I was free, like I would spend time with him. So it was like very interesting. But then like on top of that, now like being single and like trying to like get back into that, it's like an interesting balance of like trying to fight off that pressure while also like, still being a part of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like I hear a lot of people talk about this kind of the pacing of it and like what the
Yeah.
expectation is. And I'm curious from your experience, where do you think the pressure is coming from?
It's like I would say it's like a social pressure. It's like social media. Like I think especially like my age, it's like I will go on TikTok and Instagram and then you see all these things of all these vloggers posting like all their dating stuff, and like you see all these stories and it's just like so interesting. And then even like at work, like my coworkers talk about it. Like it's just like, oh, so are you dating? Like, are you on the dating apps? Like it becomes like a part of like conversations when you're like first meeting people too. I feel like it's like honestly everywhere.
Yeah. And so people are asking you about it, you're seeing it on
Yeah.
social, and like, what does it feel like? Like, when you were saying after college and you were kind of in a space of taking more time for yourself, how was that to tell people, like, oh, I'm actually like not dating right now versus how it
Yeah.
feels when you say, oh, I am dating right now? Like, what's that
Yeah.
like?
Well, and it's also like adding on to that now, like recently getting out of a relationship, it's like people being like, "Oh, so like are you back like in the dating scene? Like are you like back on the dating apps?" And when you're like, "Oh no, like I'm just taking time for myself." It's like, "Oh, so what? Are you not over this person?" And it's like that's like the immediate response. And like even when I first moved to the city and like wasn't really like wanting to, it was like, "Oh, like why not?" But then on the flip side, like you obviously do have your people that support you and are like, take your time and do what you need to do. But it's like very interesting that like sometimes the first question is like, oh, why not?
Yeah. And so when you will sit with yourself with that question, how would you answer it versus like how you would explain it to somebody else?
I mean, like how I would talk to myself about it, it's like you have to think about, are you ready? And like, are you one, like, are you mentally in the right headspace there? And two, you also have to think about the other people that you're seeing. And like, if you aren't mentally in this space and you're doing it just to succumb to societal pressures, and that's not right to whoever you're doing that to. And I think I struggled with that a lot when I first like went out there. And I would go out with people and they'd be like, oh, like I'm actually not ready for a relationship after seeing them multiple times. I'm like, then what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this to me? And I think it's always fair that like you can have that realization that you're not there. But like if you're like actively doing it and then like keep doing that, like I just like don't think it's fully right to people. So like right now I'm sitting with myself and I'm like, would I want to be on the other end of like seeing someone who feels the way that I do right now? So like that's like the thoughts that like I sit with intrinsically. And also knowing that like taking the power out of their hands, and it's like I don't want that right now. Like I feel like sometimes just focusing on yourself is so important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that's like a really kind approach, whereas, a lot of folks will use dating kind of as a means to um tend to some of the discomfort of being single, but actually aren't transparent or even like honest with themselves about what they want and what they're interested in or ready for or looking for. So
Right.
like in terms of kind of where you are in your current like heart space,
Yeah.
what are some questions that you're sitting with for yourself? Like what feels alive and true for you right now about where you are in your journey?
Yeah. And I feel like this answer changes like every day, but I feel like I'm in such of a healing part of my journey right now. Like the relationship that I got out of was like probably the first person that I had dated in my entire life that I saw a serious future with. And it just like, that's like a hard thing to come out of. And you're like kind of sitting with so many things about like, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? But I'm trying to work on flipping the narrative and really working on healing my heart and healing myself on my own, which is like a really scary and hard thing to do. And I think it's been a while since I haven't had someone. Like I hate to use the term serial dater, but like I've kind of always been in a relationship and like when one ends, like shortly fall into another, and I don't think that I give myself the time to like truly heal on my own and like kind of figure out what I need and what's good for me. And at the same time, like pouring a lot of my energy right now into my platonic relationships and like trying to not mend them, but like putting a lot more time into my friendships and the people who have been there for me during hard times. So I think like that's really where I'm at. And also I think like this breakup for me has taught me like my non-negotiables in a relationship and like when I'm dating, like the things that are most important to me. That sometimes during a breakup are the things that you see about someone and you're like, wow, like I wish I had known this about this person all along. So I think I'm just really sitting with those thoughts and trying to now be more intentional about who I'm dating and who I'm spending my time with, which I think is like a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, it is hard to do to just like sit with yourself and like really get clear and not just like
Yeah.
put yourself back in another relationship. I'm curious for you, holding that notion of serial dating with a lot of like care, like what did it give you? What was it offering you that like kind of led you to continue to seek relationship? Like what were you getting from it?
Yeah. And I think I'm this is like me being very like self-aware at this point. It's like I thrive off of external validation, as do many people. And like having someone who wants you and like feeling wanted is such a powerful thing sometimes. And like you overlook a lot. And like being by yourself is really hard. And I think like for me, this is like the first breakup that I've gone through, not being in college or in high school where you're surrounded by people all the time. Like it's lonely and it's really easy to like fall back into something and like start dating just to like feel that comfort and like have someone else. But I think like now I'm at the point where I'm realizing that and trying to like securely be like I can be by myself and fall in love with being alone and try to break that cycle and know that it's okay. But I think it's like really easy to fall into a serial dating pattern because it's like why spend the time hurting and healing and mourning a past relationship when you can just jump into another to forget how you're feeling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, like, really learning how to be in the discomfort of when you feel lonely, when you feel
Yeah.
not wanted, like, those are really hard feelings to sit with. So, like, what's supporting you at this time when you're like being courageous to actually like look and face into what it's like to stay with that experience? Like,
Yeah.
what's supporting you?
So I feel like it's like a cliche answer, but it's like falling in love with your own life and like finding the things in your life that bring you joy. So obviously it's like spend sorry, I'm congested a little bit. It's spending time with like my family and friends, but also like during the week when everyone's working and busy, it's like making time and finding things that like make you happy and doing the things like on your own that sorry. And doing the things on your own that like bring you a lot of joy, and like for me exercise is a huge thing. And I remember I'd signed up for a half marathon with my ex-boyfriend and was gonna not do it, and I was like, you know what, like this is a great thing for me to work towards on my own. And a month after we broke up I ran it, and it was like a great thing to work towards. And I was just like really proud of myself, but it's just like really channeling that. Like I've been doing a ton of new classes. I signed up for a run club with one of my friends. It's like finding the things that like make you happy on your own. Like even for me, cooking is a huge thing. It's like cooking new recipes for myself, and it's picking yourself up flowers. It's like doing all those little things for yourself. That's like so important.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think those are all really like just such an important things to offer. Like, oh yeah, I am worth buying flowers for myself. I am worth
Yeah,
cooking a really nice meal for myself. Like, I
right,
don't have to wait for another person. And
right.
yeah, yeah, that's really profound. So, in terms of like you were talking about that sense of readiness, and it sounds like you're taking really good care of your heart and like where you are. Are you available and interested in dating? Are you like right now less like interested in it?
So I think where I'm at right now is I'm not actively seeking. It's more like if it comes and it's right and it
Uh-huh.
feels right, then that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's like a good place to be in, like where I'm just really focusing on myself and my happiness and my mental health and my relationships around me. That like if something falls into place right now, then that's great. But if not, like I'm not like going to be upset about that. And I think it'll be good for me to have some alone time.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of like how your relationship life has panned out so far, over this course of your life, how has it like mirrored what you've learned or thought relationships should look like? And how has it been different than what you were taught or what has been modeled for you or ideas you've had about relationships? Like, how has your path been kind of uniquely yours?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one thing for me, it's like a lot of the people around me have been in such long term relationships, like decades of relationships. And it's like my thing that I've seen, it's like you fall in love with someone and like that's your person. And all like a lot of my friends that are in long term relationships where it's the same thing too. And it's like my dating path has been a lot of trial and error and a lot of heartbreak, um and I think that's okay. And I think it's honestly like taught me so much about myself and like what I find most important in dating. And I think the things that I'm looking for as I've gotten older and as I've had more experience has shifted. Like I think like I look at some of my first relationships and they were like very based on like that whole external validation, like someone that I'm attracted to. And there were personality flaws that I overlooked because I let the other things come before those. And now I'm like looking, okay, more some of these personality, the emotional maturity aspects, like those are way more important to me now. So I think like my dating path has just like really taught me what's most important in a partner, which I think is awesome. But it's very different than everyone around me, which I think is honestly like pretty cool.
Yeah, so you're like finding kind of some confidence in your own needs and um, desires shaping up just through lived experience. Like, what are some of the things that are really important to you that you've learned? I know you had said like emotional maturity, but like what else matters and what matters less to you now than it used to?
Yeah. I mean, emotional maturity is like the biggest thing for me. It's someone who, because I feel like I'm very in tune with my emotions and over communicate. And I think any good relationship is built on communication and trust. And I think I've had relationships where that stuff wasn't at the forefront, and you see that those obviously aren't successful because you're not talking about things and people aren't able to voice how they're feeling. And I think that's one of the most important things in a relationship for me. And I think another thing too is just values. Like I think I'm really close with my family. Like we have really strong values and really support and uplift one another, and I want someone that fits into that mold as well. And I think like another huge thing that I've noticed in like New York dating is just like someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously and is like very humble. Which like I never thought was that important until I met some people. Not trying to like stereotype New York a little bit, but definitely like having a humble background is huge to me. And I think like a lot of those like foundational characteristics were things that I never really valued as much. And like I'm gonna be honest, like when I first started my dating journey and everything was like very shallow. It was about like looks, it was about like what other people thought about them. And like that stuff is like not nearly as important as those foundational aspects of someone.
Talk to me a little bit about humility. I think that's really on point, and I'm curious about like what like how you recognize it in somebody and like why it feels really important to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone is accomplished in their own way. Everyone has so much to offer and so much to give. And like it doesn't matter your background. And I think it's very interesting. Like obviously feel very fortunate having gone to a great college, like having great opportunities, but there were times at Boston College where like I felt like I was like, "Oh my gosh, like am I poor?" And I would like walk around and see all these people just flaunting everything in the way that they carry themselves, and they talked about their family's wealth and like what they have going for them and their future, and just like the way that they carried themselves just made me feel so intimidated as someone, and like didn't feel like I deserved to be with them. So I think regardless of where you come from, like what you do for a living, the way that you carry yourself is so important, and the way that you make other people feel, whether that's welcome, like I find that so important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like having that grounded sense of like treating other people like human beings, regardless
Right.
of what they
Regardless of,
have, what they don't
yeah,
have, and not having that be like what you're focused on for like worth or value
yeah,
or, and I think that's just so culturally conditioned too. Like, yeah.
yeah,
So
1000%.
if you were to view relationships or dating as a practice or a spiritual practice, like what is it that you are in an active practice with right now? Like what are some things that you are like discovering or working with, like difficulty that has been coming up? Like what are you working with right now?
Yeah, I think like one thing, it's like you always have to be working on yourself. like not only within your relationship but outside of your relationship. Like no one's perfect, and I think while like in the stage that I'm in, like I recognize that I have things to work through, and I think like coming to that realization on both ends of a relationship is so important, to not only like work on those things separately but also together, and to open up like that door of communication between one another. So I think right now, like I'm honestly practicing on like fixing, not fixing is not a word that I want to use, not fixing, but trying to push away from a lot of, I would say honestly, my anxious attachment styles, and like trying to fix and heal a lot of that, so that I can be a better partner for someone. So it's like I think just constantly trying to work and better yourself and each other is so important.
Yeah. And what kind of led you to anxious attachment being like a focal point of working that edge, like wanting to put time to heal that part of your patterning? Like, how did
Yeah.
that come to be for you?
I mean, I've always known that that's been my attachment style, like based on experiences that I've been through, how I put a lot of how I'm feeling and my self-worth into the hands of someone else and the way that they're treating me, and just constantly second guessing and doubting myself within a relationship, and knowing that that's not healthy and it shouldn't be like that. And I think that it's something that like I've always known. I was like, oh, you know what, the right person, like I won't feel like this. But it was like, you know what, there are a lot of things within me that I probably need to heal and work on, so that even when it is the right person, I'm not doubting them. Like if they don't respond to me for 8 hours, oh, they're probably having a busy work day, and it's not that they've lost interest in me. So it's kind of flipping the narrative a little bit, and it's something that I'm really working on right now.
Yeah. And what are you learning about yourself in the process? Like, what are some insights that you're discovering about
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
I mean, it's just like that there are experiences that lead you to feeling like that, and that it's like it's not something that you can necessarily control. And like unfortunately, I've been in not the best relationships where things have happened that have led me to be this way, and it's like obviously we all have our demons and things that have led to trauma that we deal with today, but it's like you recognize that and you work through that so that you can be better in every single encounter that you have.
Right. And like having your own awareness of the patterning and like meeting yourself with gentleness and knowing what you need around it so you can tell the other person, like, this helps
Exactly.
me, even like I'm
Yeah.
owning it. And
Yeah.
also they can then meet you in it with a
Yeah.
lot of care and sensitivity.
Right.
And
And like that's a huge thing too, is self-compassion is like another major thing. And it's like not being too hard on yourself when you're trying to work through some of those things. And one thing that my therapist tells me, it's like you say this to yourself, if this is your best friend asking it, like how would you respond to them? So it's like trying to flip it a little bit too, which I think is cool.
yeah. And I think part of like, going back to what you're talking about with the loneliness and having it be difficult to spend time with ourselves, like if we're in a headspace where that there's a lot of that negative like self-talk or like harsh self-talk, like of course it's hard to sit by
Yeah,
ourselves because like that, that's what we're dealing with.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, is there any area in your relationship life, and this can be platonic,
Yeah.
familial, romantic, that like you want to like play and discover and expand? Like, where are places that you're like, oh, I'm really curious about X? Like, is there anything alive for you in that area?
Yeah. And I think like I'm honestly trying that right now by like it was one of my New Year's resolutions to make, how you always run into people and you're like, oh, like I loved seeing them, I loved talking to them, I enjoyed it. I've like tried to make it an intentional goal to actually reach out to that person, because I feel like we always do that where it's like "Oh, like, it was great to see you, like, let's catch up sometime." I was like, "Actually, like, we talked for 2 hours and I had a great time." So I'm, like, really trying to lean into that and rekindle, some friendships that not I wouldn't say fell off, but, like, that I didn't prioritize as much, and I was like, "Wow, I really miss that person," and trying to do things with them, and more wholesome activities and trying to bring in some of my hobbies with new people. So I think that's something that I'm like really excited about. And it's starting to make me love New York again. Cause I feel like you go through phases sometimes with where you're living, especially New York, where like you can hate it sometimes, it can feel lonely, but it's like trying to fall in love with it again and trying to rekindle relationships with people that you're really like, I have a lot in common with them. So that's kind of my aliveness right now.
I love that. So like going out of your way to reconnect with people that you know you
Yeah.
had a connection with.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly.
And are you inviting them to do certain things? Like you talked about wholesome activities. Like how does
Yeah,
that actually look? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that, like the outreach part. So like talk to us about how you're doing that.
yeah. I mean, it's like it's whatever you talk about with that person. Like one of my college friends who I hadn't seen since we had graduated, we were talking about like our favorite Pilates classes in the city. And I asked her if she wanted to go to one with me, something like that. Or one of my friends, I convinced her to join the run club with me. Or even like another thing too, it's like one of my friends just moved over on the west side of the city and like, I was like, "Why don't we do a picnic outside?" Like, it's just, like, finding the little things, like, when you're talking to someone and that you know that you both have in common, and it would be, like, a great way to rekindle. Because, like, a lot of times you feel the pressure to, like, go to a restaurant with them, get drinks, like, do those things, but it's, like, trying to find a common activity, I think is a really awesome way to rekindle.
I love that. Like really building off of the threads of connection
Yeah,
that are already there and just like extending it. And yeah,
exactly, and finding people to do the things that you love with too, I think is awesome.
exactly. It gives you more reason to go out and do it.
Yeah,
So so I think the last thing I'll ask you is around just like big lessons you feel like you've learned about this part of your life. Like, and again, I think when we talk about relationships, it could be about familial, community, platonic, and romantic. But like, what are some lessons that you feel like you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I finally know this versus like when you were younger, it was something that was
yeah,
harder that you would maybe teach, like if you had, I don't know, a younger sibling or cousin or like younger
yeah.
person. Yeah.
I think, like, honestly, being your authentic self is the most important thing. And, like, trying not to be someone just for people to like you is so important because you want to be who you actually are with them and not put on a front. And I think on that same vein, it's like being vulnerable is so important. And it's sometimes you might get hurt, but for me, it's like I'd rather be vulnerable and put it all out there than leave any relationship, whether it's romantic, platonic, anything with regret. And so I think those are two things that I know I was like always so afraid of, but now I'm like, you know what? At least I gave it my all. Like I even think about my last relationship and I'm like, you know what? Like it might have ended in a heartbreak, but like I know that I was vulnerable. I put myself out there and it didn't work out, not because I wasn't being my authentic, genuine self. And I wore my heart on my sleeve. And sometimes that's the best thing that you can do.
And I think that's also why there's more heartbreak is like when we
Yeah.
put our heart sincerely out there and then it doesn't work out, it's like, then I hear you in those questions of like, is there something wrong with me? And then like, no, maybe there just isn't alignment, but like it makes
Yeah.
sense that the brain, the mind will like go to that place because the
Right.
authentic self is what was actually being offered. And I think so
Yeah.
much of like, it's true, like a lot of dating, people will hide behind some facade, but it also kind of dampens the blow of when it doesn't work or if there's,
Yeah.
hurt. So it's
Yeah.
courageous to do. Yeah.
Yeah. But, like, heartbreak is honestly sometimes a beautiful thing. Like, it's, like, such a dark moment, but you learn so much about yourself and, like, that whole healing process and, like, knowing that you put yourself out there, it just, like, makes you more prepared for whatever is in store for your next encounter, whatever it may be.
That's so true. I feel called to ask you, like, what do you feel celebratory of in terms of how you navigated the heartbreak and that you talked about like the darkness? Like, what do you
Yeah.
feel celebratory of for yourself?
I mean, I think it's like every single heartbreak and heartache that I've been through, I feel like I've come out stronger. Like I think about like a relationship I had in college and I was begging this person when we broke up, like begging them to stay with me, like trying to convince them that like our relationship was the right thing. And like I feel like this time around, I was like, you know what? Like these actions speak louder than words. And like, I don't want someone that doesn't want to be with me. And I deserve to receive a love as strong as the one that I was willing to give them. And I just like feel like there's so much growth and power that comes from a mind shift. And like that shows healing over time of like going from someone that's begging someone to be with you, someone that you don't cut contact with, and it's just like a back and forth for months and you're not getting better. Like this person's not moving on either versus a relationship where you realize that you know what, they didn't see in me what I saw in them, and that's fine. And you know what, I'm just gonna move on.
Yeah, I love that. It's a lot of maturity and
Yeah,
beauty,
it's
and I'm proud of you.
really thank
Yeah,
you.
so good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and to share more about your heart. Is there anything
Yeah.
that we didn't cover that you wish we did?
No, no, this is awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
This is
thank
like
you.
the first time I've ever done anything like this, but it was very cool to have to intrinsically think about this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's like we learn from each other. And I think like dating is one of those areas that like we need new stories and new ways of being and new ways to do it. So I love
Yeah.
to hear your story and like how you're holding it and what you're exploring, and feel really grateful for your vulnerability and just for everything you
No,
shared.
no, of course. Thank you.
Let me stop the recording.